Hello and welcome back to the Bible in Our World Today. Glad you could be with us. This has been a very tragic week for our country, as again we've had another major school shooting in Texas, other things that have gone on. We really need to be praying for our nation and praying for all that's taking place today. It was interesting, when I started this series of the one world political and economic system, I really wondered, was it a series that I should do? And this week I got a magazine, a periodical. I've been getting it for just many years. And this magazine had an article in it about the one world government. And I thought to myself, well, I'm maybe not too far off on teaching on this. And I began to look some things up and to research what's going on. And I just found an article where in Davos, Switzerland, a group of very wealthy men, billionaires, millionaires, political people, people that own corporations, kind of the who's who in the world today when it comes to finances. And the purpose for their meeting was to talk about and begin to plan for the loss of nationalism and the growth of globalism, which is the one world government. That's what they're after today. Many men, I could list the names and you'd know many of them, but there's a movement about today to move our world into a one world political and one world economic system. The Antichrist isn't here, but John told us in 1 John chapter 2 that there would be many Antichrists, men that have the characteristics of the Antichrist, and that they would in effect be in the world and would be affecting the direction and the course of humanity. And there is this movement, as I said today, to direct us in that direction. There is an agenda called the 2030 Agenda that was given to the United Nations, and this agenda is to, in 2030, really get serious about moving our world into a global economic system. I happen to believe that we are on the very brink of the coming of the Lord. I've said this in many videos, the coming of the Lord for the church, but the arrival of the Antichrist to begin this tribulation period in this one world government that will affect this world so drastically during that last 3.5 years. And I just wanted to share some of those ideas with you that are relevant to what we're seeing today in our world. Now, we're going to continue and we're going to close today this section that we started a week ago on the idea of these merchants and these very wealthy men standing back as this Babylonian system, this Babylonian city and system is destroyed because it was central to their life. And so we've read 3 verses that God gave us that pertain expressly to these men and their great sorrow over the loss, if you will, of their merchandise, of their commodities, of their businesses. It all is coming to an end, and they're seeing it end as they watch the destruction of this Babylonian city. And I want to read Revelation chapter 18, verse 11, because this is the last verse in that section. And this verse says this, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. He's talking here about the merchants of the earth. These are people who've been accustomed to trafficking, if you will, trading in this very wicked, evil city and with this very wicked, evil system. And they have been enriched greatly by their dealings with her. If you go back to Daniel chapter 4, verse 30, you'll see Nebuchadnezzar standing on the rooftop in Babylon, and he's looking out over this great city, and he's saying how great and wonderful, majestic this city is, and in essence alluding to the wealth that goes with it. And he says, to this city that I have built. And immediately he became in such a mental state that for the next 7 years he lived like an animal in the pasture field. This is a tragedy. Would have never had to happen, but this was an example of the pride of Nebuchadnezzar as he gloried over all that he had in Babylon. Here is a similar picture that these men are mourning and weeping over the loss of that same city that Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed was so great. And here we're at least 2,500 years later, and men again are in the same position that Nebuchadnezzar was in as they mourn and weep because their city, their riches, their wealth is gone. It's done away with. Many who have been accustomed to dealing with this city, its merchants, its traffickers, everyone, they're affected by it. They have reason to lament. We're going to look at some following verses that are going to mention other men who stand afar off, weeping and wailing, because everything that was important to them in life is gone. It's done away with. It's not there anymore. We can put our faith and trust in our riches, but when they're gone, and that's the only thing we have, man will weep and mourn, just as we see here. It says here, for no man buyeth their merchandise anymore. There's no city, there's no financial system to deal with anymore. Everything, again, as I've said, that was important to these merchants, the wealth, the materialism, the commodities, they're totally gone, totally done away with. Isn't it ironic? And I thought as I was doing this and preparing this message, in Revelation chapter 13, verse 7, no man can buy or sell without taking the mark of the beast. So these men have all taken the mark of the beast. And they have sealed themselves to doom with Satan. Can never be saved, can never be redeemed, because they are sealed with that mark to the day of judgment. Now, here they are. And the only thing at this point in their life they have to look forward to is the judgment of God that will fall on them, and a point now in their life where they will never have anything. They've lost it all. What a tragedy when you stop and contemplate what all this means, what all of this entails that God has shown to us. Now, we're going to look at these next verses here. We're going to look at verse 12 and 13. There's two ways of dealing with these verses. These two verses enumerate the things, if you will, that were the commodity items, the merchandise that these men were made wealthy off from, that they dealt in. And as I said, there's two ways to deal with them. One is we can just read over them and say, oh, I understand these, yep, that's, and move on to the next verses. Or we can at least go over each item and at least comment on it. And as I looked at the items, there are some interesting things that show up here. And as is my custom of teaching, I don't just go over verses and move on to the next one because a verse may not be important in some certain people's eyes. Everything in Scripture is important, everything. And so I go over all of it. And so I'm going to read for you. We're going to look at Revelation 18, verses 12 and 13. I'm going to read just verse 12 for right now. And this is what it says. Revelation 18, verse 12. The merchandise of gold, silver, precious stones, and of pearls, and fine linen, and purple, and silk, and scarlet, and all fine wood, and all manner of vessels of ivory, and all manner vessels of most precious wood, and of brass, and iron, and marble. This is the list. Now there's more listed in verse 13, which we will get to. But I'm going to go over these and just start with the first two, the merchandise, he says, of gold and of silver. The very same things that our monetary system is built on today, gold and silver. These are the very first items, probably the most desired items, probably the most important items that these men were dealing in. Then he goes from these two precious metals of gold and silver to, he says, precious stones and pearls. These items have always been highly sought after items in the world, even in the world we live in today. Stones and pearls and jewels of these kinds, highly sought after. Very, very expensive items, depending on what they are in our world today. And nothing will change during the tribulation period. They will still be items of great value. Now he says fine linen. Notice here that this fine linen is desired by the wicked, evil men of the world who have been sealed by the Antichrist, been sealed to Satan. These evil men of the world who follow this wicked leader. Now notice what God says. And this is Revelation chapter 19, verse 8. He says this, and to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white, for the fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. Isn't it ironic that here, as we're looking at a wicked system that is only a system designed and built for the establishment of man, for the wealth of man, for men to be wealthy. And here God says in Revelation 19:18, and what this is a picture of is the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he says those of us who are going to be at the marriage supper of the Lamb are going to be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white. Because fine linen is the righteousness of the saints of God. And yet here wicked men have taken the fine linen and, in a sense, almost perverted it. And it becomes something that they lust after because it brings them huge amounts of wealth. Isn't it different? I mean, it's peculiar, it's strange, I don't know what word to use, but how man takes the things that God lifts up as very important, and man perverts them. It's like the rainbow today. God says the rainbow's a symbol that I'll never destroy the earth with a flood again. And yet man has taken that same rainbow today and made it a very perverted image in our world that we live in. man seems to be really good at doing those kinds of things. Now he says here, purple. This refers to garments that have been through a great amount of labor, dyed with a purple dye extra, and this dye comes from a shellfish. Acts chapter 16:14 tells us that Lydia was a seller of purple, of expensive garments. She may have been the most wealthy lady in all of the New Testament. And this purple dye, I believe, if I remember right, a pound of that dye was equal in that day to a year of wages for a man. Very, very, very expensive. And another thing to point out about how important this was, that this was a distinctive mark of the Caesars. They all wore purple robes because it was a sign of royalty, but it was a sign of riches. And at the end of the age, at the end of the earth, purple will still be a very sought after item and a very expensive item. Now the next thing he mentions in this is silk. Again, a very valuable article of commerce. It was costly. Only rich people wore silk. At one time, a pound of silk was valued as the same as a pound of gold. That's how important it was. And it appears, from what God tells us, that in the end of the age, this silk is going to be as valuable as it was in ancient times. And so it's a very costly commodity that has been done away with the destruction of Babylon. Scarlet, it talks about here, the word scarlet. And let me just read, I've got some definitions that I've copied down, and so I'm going to read these definitions here, and so we get an idea of what's being talked about. And I keep looking down because I'm looking at a clock, because I can only go for 25 minutes with these videos, so I have to keep track of that, and that's why I keep looking. I've got it laying here on the ground beside me. The word scarlet properly denotes a bright red color, brighter than crimson, which is a red color that has been tinged with blue. The color was obtained from a small insect which was found adhering to the shoots of a species of oak only in Spain and Western Asia. This was the usual color of robes for princes and used in military cloaks also. It is associated in the description of the Roman Catholic Church because this is the favorite color in that church. So you see from the description, very hard to come by, very hard to produce, and very expensive once it is produced, and very, very desirable in the lives of very rich and wealthy men. And again, this is why they're weeping and wailing and mourning, because there's no scarlet anymore. He mentions thine wood. The word used here for that thine wood, it doesn't occur anywhere else in the New Testament, only here in the book of Revelation. And it speaks about an evergreen African tree from which statues and costly vessels were made. And I would suspect that during this day of the last part of the tribulation period, this thine wood was made to erect statues for various things, probably maybe even some kind of religious worship, yet we know that all the worship was towards the Antichrist and Satan himself. So I don't know, but there would have been statues made from it, different vessels, and have been very, very important for whatever they were using it for. Now, he goes on to say that another very, very desirable commodity was ivory. The tusk of an elephant has always been among used to carve very precious and expensive articles of commerce. I did a little research on it, and it appears that today ivory, if it's harvested today, is illegal. And it's illegal to have these ivory products unless they are made many years ago, and that has to be proven. But in the coming age, when the Antichrist rules, this ivory, there apparently will be no prohibition against it. There will be no laws against it, and it will be something that will be highly traded during the tribulation period. These men again are mourning because there's no more ivory to trade. All vessels, all manner of vessels of precious wood. I have a friend of mine that does woodworking, and he buys wood at a store here locally around us, and he has told me different times just extremely expensive pieces of exotic woods that this company sells. Not illegal to have them, you can have them, it's just it is so expensive to have those items. And apparently during this time, and by the way, just to give you a few ideas here, cedar, citron tree, Lugumividia tree, I don't know if I even pronounced that right, but there's many today of very exotic woods. And during this time period, and if you read the accounts in Revelation, the destruction, I would suspect that in the tribulation period, these exotic woods will be even more valuable, more expensive than they are today in our society. So this is something that they have lost. And he talks about brass and iron and marble. Now, we would not really consider some of these things that expensive today. Although, again, I have a brother that deals in, manages a very large company that deals in concrete supplies, and they buy a lot of iron. They buy a lot of steel. And he was telling me how much in the last year or two that it has skyrocketed in price. And marble's always been expensive, and brass has always been a little more expensive than some of the metals today. And so what we see here is during this tribulation time, these are going to be very, very, very valuable items and highly sought after. So it's no wonder that we read these passages of Scripture and we see just the mourning and the sorrow, the weeping that is taking place as these men have lost all of these valuable products. Folks, when man puts his trust in things instead of his trust in God, he's going to lose everything. And God tells us that one day he's going to destroy this world and this heaven with fire, and he's going to create a new heaven and a new earth. And everything in this world will be gone. Nothing that you and I have, even today, will last. It'll be gone. It'll be burned up. And we see here that God is showing the fallacy of following the satanic Antichrist, taking his mark, and rejecting the grace and the mercy and the love of a holy and righteous God. What a tragedy that man chooses Satan over God. And that's what they've done here. Next week, we're going to look at the other verse, and then we'll move on. But I wanted to go over these because I thought it was important. And again, as I said, sometimes we pass over these verses, but I did not want to do that. I wanted to be sure we understood everything that was being said here. I'm so thankful that you've been a part of this today. Our time is up. We are going to have to bring this video to an end. My folks, our world is just changing almost daily. Not for the better, but it seems that our world is getting further and further away from God. And more it's becoming a world that wants nothing to do with God, but wants everything to do with Satan. This movement we see today that I shared with you, and I got several articles, I didn't even bring them, I didn't want to take the time to read them, but several articles dealing with the future one world government. I believe that what we're seeing today is the foundation is being laid for the Antichrist to step in and just pick up where man has left off today and form that one world political and economic system. I think we're very close to that day happening. And when I first started this series, I thought maybe this isn't a series I should be teaching, but God led me here, and I believe that God wanted me to do it. And we're going to continue, and we're going to finish Revelation chapter 18. And I don't know where we're going to go after that, but I'm positive the Lord will lead us somewhere. Thank you, folks, for watching the video. May God bless you and enrich your lives. And may we just keep our eyes on Jesus in this week ahead. And we'll be right back here in another week, continuing our study of the one world economic and political system found in Revelation chapter 18.